Okay, so this one is going to be a bit more on kind of interactive monster mechanics. And I'm going to start it off. Sorry. Back's a little tight today. But, so I'm going to start it off with what I think is one of the best examples of these types of mechanics. And it comes from Devil May Cry 4. So, for those who don't know, in Devil May Cry 4, you don't play the long-running main character of the series, Dante. You play this new character named Nero. And there's obviously some familial connection, but you don't really learn in that game. You get a lot of hints and a lot of foreshadowing, but you don't directly learn in that game, and it's not important to this. Main thing to know is that this Nero character, he has his main ability, like special demonic trait, whatever you want to call it, is something called the Devil Bringer, which is his right arm. I think it's his right. Yeah. His right arm is all glowy and weird, and he can use it to summon this big spectral version of the arm that interacts as if it's a giant-ass arm. And it's incredibly strong. It's, this arm is like, he's a normal-sized guy, and this arm is like, just the forearm is like, if it were to sit there, it'd be taller than him. So, it's huge, and it's appropriately strong, as if it's attached to that size creature. And at the start of the game, and for the most part, you can use it in two ways. When you're locked onto an enemy, it'll do a quick pull and drag enemies closer. And that's a cool little mechanic to change positioning of enemies via changing their position instead of you moving around. That's a really cool mechanic, but that's not what I'm going to talk about. That's not the main thing I'm getting at here. The other way to use it is when you're not locked on and you have to manually kind of aim this. You can do this quick, like, upward grab. It's shorter ranged, but when you do this, it'll actually grab an enemy and perform some sort of damaging throw. Most normal, like a lot of the normal enemies, it's just like a grab and then a slam, and this slam is also an attack that will affect other enemies. And that's nice and interactive too. Like, I've done this with some of my enemies in Site 27, where they like slam, or they'll like do a palm thrust on one of the PCs, and it knocks them a certain distance, and if they collide with any party members, they all take damage. So it's like that kind of idea. But just keep this quick grab in mind. Like, it's billed as being able to grab and like lift immense amounts of weight and just about anything. And also, a lot of the bosses that you encounter in this game, you interact with this in some way. Like, one of the first bosses in the game is this, like, immense, like, fire lion centaur dude who's, like, 100 times your size. Or 50, I don't know. Man, he's huge. And you're fighting him, and then whenever you get him into, like, a staggered state, you can initiate a grab, in which, like, you grab him, you punch him a few times with this big arm, and then you lift him up into the air and slam him around when he's the size of, like, a 4-story building and you're a dude. That's pure spectacle. But later on, you're fighting a small, like a guy that's, like, kind of your size, and he summons these, like, radiant angelic spears to throw at you. And you dodge all this stuff. But at a certain point, I was fighting him. I was like, can I grab this? Like, I don't know if I heard about it from somewhere or I came up with it on my own, which is another issue with these types of mechanics. Like, they have to be foreshadowed or something. Or maybe, like, you know what, I'll get into this. But the point is, he can throw these spears, and if you time it right, you can actually just grab the spear and throw it back at him. And then it'll stun him, and you can get some, this is like the main way to get like extended openings on this enemy. But like that kind of mechanic where they'll throw something at you, or a monster does something, and a player character can use a reaction to interact with this thing in some way. That is super interesting, and I love those types of mechanics. And they're really simple ways both to flesh out a monster and differentiate it from other monsters, and at the same time keep the PCs engaged a little bit more when it's not their turn. And not everything needs to be exactly this. You don't need to be able to catch every weapon thrown at you and throw it back. But certain enemies, sure. Especially like if it's, say, this incredibly well-protected enemy that surrounds himself with like floating shields. And when he attacks, he throws like spears from long range, say, just to keep this example going. Well, one of the, his AC's like 26 or something absurd. You can only hit him on a crit, basically. A crit or like an 18 or 19. Well, maybe he'll throw these spears, and if the spear misses, or maybe you can just use your reaction to try to make a difficult dex save. And if you do that, you avoid the attack entirely, and you catch the spear and can immediately throw it back as part of the reaction, and then you make an attack roll. So there's one, from the mechanics perspective, there's 2 steps of failure for this. Like, you can attempt to make the dex save, and if you succeed, then you can make the attack roll, which is another layer of potential failure. But also maybe if you try to make the dex save, the attack is an automatic hit if you miss, if you fail to save. So there's some risk. It's not a huge risk because you might get attacked anyway. And maybe you have to declare this before the DM rolls or something. And the DM would have to say this. Maybe not the first spear thrown, something. Maybe. Oh, and yeah, if you throw this back at him, maybe his AC is reduced for a little bit because he gets stunned or something. Or just this is the main way to damage him. Whatever it is. You could tweak those numbers. But the way you could describe this is essentially something like, like you're a group of 3, and let's say this boss has just one attack. Let's say he has one attack on the first round, and he has 1 legendary action, let's say. So he can make a total of 2 spear tosses per round or something. Whatever it is. However it works, it doesn't matter. But it would be the first spear thrown. It would be something, especially if the players have already tried to attack him fruitlessly against these, like, a horde of shields. You go to attack this dude, and it's futile. You can't get through. So then, you either back off or he backs off or whatever. And then he throws the spears. And the first, you can't react to the first one. But, you say to all the player characters, give me a perception check or an insight check, whatever they are. Or maybe you could skip the check entirely. Depends on if you just want them to make a check or not. But, you notice that when he throws the spears, the shields all move away, giving him ample room to throw. Something like that. And that gives them the idea that there's something they can do when he's throwing the spear. And maybe it doesn't have to be that they catch the spear. Maybe it's just he provokes opportunity attacks when he does this from ranged weapons. And this is when you can shoot him. Something along those lines. It's just, maybe you have to bait him into using these spear throws, and maybe the spear throws are very dangerous. There's a lot of ways you can go with that. But just these kind of interactive mechanics, and they don't always have to be the monster does a thing and the players can spend a reaction to do a thing in response. It doesn't have to be that. I recently, the other day, I just designed a monster for fun. It was like a shadow-infected dryad. And one of the main features I gave this dryad was, I built off the base dryad, and it has this tree stride ability where it can duck into a tree and appear out of another tree. So I thought, okay, it's like a shadow-infected dryad. There's some corruptive elements there. And there's also, it has something to do with a black dragon is involved somehow because of the prompt I was given. So, all right, it ducks into the tree, and when it does so, it tears a hole in the tree. Whereas a normal dryad just ducks in and comes out, and it doesn't damage the tree at all. This one is corruptive and damaging to the nature around it. So it damages the tree, and it leaves a temporary portal that the players can follow into. And when they do so, they take a little damage. But this dryad will use this ability to maneuver around and constantly be out of range and out, just disrupt the player's positioning. But as soon as the melee guys do close in, at least close, and the dryad uses this ability, then on their turn, they can follow it into the tree and keep on it. So the battle can move all over the place, but the player characters can stay relatively close. The melee characters can follow it around, but they continually take little bits of damage. It's something along those lines. I think that's a reasonably interactive and fun idea. And ideally, these mechanics can always be layered upon. You might fight this boss, and this is just something you do, you might fight this creature as a boss at level 6. And then level 10, you might fight one or two of these and some other creatures. So that would be tricky. But yeah, I always like some kind of interactive mechanics. And for me, for my first example, a lot of this stuff comes from different action-based video games, and in some cases, a lot of JRPGs, where in those games, you can do a lot of, you get a lot of cool abilities in JRPGs. And then, you use them on normal enemies, and then you come up against a boss, and the boss is just immune to everything. And you just have to do damage to it until it dies. And you can't do any of the cool stuff. You can't use poison, you can't paralyze it, you can't do anything. I always thought that was actually a relatively large contributing factor towards why I stopped playing a lot of JRPGs. I know they're not that way anymore. The design has evolved a lot, but But that's the other thing, giving players cool options and then just eliminating them is another problem. If the players have all these abilities that tie into fear and charm, above level 9, everything's immune to those. You can't use the frightened, you can't frighten a demon, for example. And in some cases, that's fine. At earlier levels, you might use Hypnotic Pattern or Fear, the Fear spell, to debilitate and crowd control enemies. While at higher levels, a wizard or a sorcerer or whatever can't do that anymore. And that's fine for that type of character. Like, okay, I just have to use different spells because, like, the wizard is kind of designed to be able to do that. Like, okay, I'll just switch my spells out. But what about a conquest paladin whose aura and one of their channel divinities is fear-based? What do you do there? Like, a big part of their character, like their features that they can't swap out, now is useless if, like, they go into, like, hell. Like, they have to fight in the abyss or something. Now they can't use a big portion of their features, so what do? Well, the options are either you allow that character, that player, to change their subclass to something else, or you give them an ability that allows them to overcome resistance or immunity to fear. Like, if that's their whole character identity, you let them keep that. So yeah, that was a rambling about interactive mechanics and some stuff. Cheers.